Forbes Books presents The Great Digital Transformation with Gerard Zatvani, highlighting the pioneers that reimagined possibilities and reimagined businesses. Hola, it's Joe Pardavila. This week, Gerry and I welcome a visionary leader, a best-selling author, and a global expert on customer experience and digital transformation. Joe Wheeler is the CEO of CX Digital, a consulting firm that helps organizations create value by designing and delivering exceptional customer experiences. He's also the co-author of 3 influential books, including his latest, The Digital First Customer Experience, which reveals the secrets of how leading brands are leveraging digital technologies to innovate and differentiate themselves in the market. Joe, welcome to the podcast.
Great, Joe. Great to be here.
Since Gerry and I have started this journey talking about digital transformation, the whole AI revolution took place in the middle of us doing this podcast. And that's pretty much sort of your bag. And one of the reasons we want to get you, we want to get you in this conversation. And I know a big thing that you talk about in your book and in your work is about rituals. So let's talk about some examples of rituals that businesses have created or facilitated using AI to connect their customers and foster a sense of belonging.
Yeah, it's helpful to distinguish, Joe, between kind of a habit and a ritual, right? Because we're familiar with habits. It tends to be something that's pretty automatic. We all have good and bad habits. They tend to be unconscious, right? And they're usually triggered by something, and then it's followed by a behavior and then a specific action. And Charles Duhigg wrote a great book called The Power of Habits. And marketers love that idea. Marketers love the idea of forming habits because it's like, apply, rinse, and repeat. It doesn't get better than that from a retention standpoint, but rituals are different. Rituals, the way researchers think about rituals is there's sort of 3 regulatory processes. One is about emotions and how we actually use this notion of a rigid physical set of steps to moderate them. And then the second is it typically is goal related, and then there's a social aspect to it. So companies that really understand how to build rituals, one that I featured in this chapter, Joe, is about Starbucks. I mean, Starbucks really celebrates coffee as a ritual. And when you and I and Gerry sit in the Starbucks, you see lots of people kind of going through their Starbucks kind of coffee ritual. That's pretty much what that third place was all about. So figuring out how you can shape a ritual, especially ones that connect frontline employees with customers, is sort of the holy grail of customer experience in some ways.
Gerry, and we've never really used that term ritual. What's your take on what Joe's talking about here?
Well, yes, I totally can relate to what Joe is saying about rituals. Definitely, it's a very powerful experience if you can get to it, and if you can connect kind of the emotion to the entire process. It's not just the process of making a coffee, but you need to go there, buy your coffee. It's like I have my own Starbucks ritual. I need to start my day with a latte. So definitely I can personally relate to what that ritual is. I think that the tricky part of designing this is how do you do rituals at scale? How do you codify it? How do you make sure that your employees actually follow the steps and they are consistent? Like it's one thing that is really good about Starbucks is that you kind of get the same latte pretty much everywhere you are, and the customer experience is kind of the same. They all mess up your name more or less in the same way. It needs to be consistent, and they design the process in order to be consistent so that you can go and perform your ritual regardless of where in the world you are at Starbucks. And I think that's really the tricky part in building these rituals, especially when you scale an enterprise. How do you put it together in a way that, from the way you step into a store and you kind of everything feels familiar and all of the things are happening in a certain order, so that it kind of can build into a ritual.
I mean, Gerry offers great advice. Remember, I always say, one of the reasons why I wrote this book, Joe, was because a colleague of mine from Kellogg wrote this article published in Forbes. He said, should be the aspiration of every company to deliver a touchless experience. And, that struck me as pretty good advice. We'd all, suffered through COVID and stores locked down. At the same time, I probably quoted the great Charlotte Beers from Ogilvy, who said, what makes a brand powerful is the emotional involvement of customers. And so what you're on to, Gerry, is how do you make this? Because the thing about rituals is there's two aspects. One is it's typically emotional, but it's also kind of social, and it has meaning more than something like a habit. So what's interesting to me with, like, for example, Starbucks, is two aspects of it. One is, how does AI and machine learning really enable those baristas to connect with customers that help create an emotional outcome, and one that's also involving, right? And that's kind of your point. How do you scale this? And one of the things, they got into some trouble. I often say, if Starbucks can miscalculate, the impact of things like mobile ordering and things like that, anybody can. Because, as we all saw, Mr. Schultz was brought in front of the Congressional Committee to talk about certification processes and what's gone on there. But what I will tell you is that what's interesting is they're responding with $1 billion worth of investment into the partner experience. But one of those investments is an operational one, Gerry. So their new Siren system basically reduces the time it takes to make a Frappuccino by 2/3. Think about how many cold drinks, because they're mixed change, right? They went from hot beverages to cold, like massively, not by 50 basis points, but by like 40%. So those baristas were getting hit from both sides. Massive demand because of COVID for mobile ordering, and a completely changed mix on an operational process that sort of wasn't their lead process. So number one is, how does AI help frontline folks be able to deliver at capacity and match capacity demand, which they're doing a much better job of. But then, Joe and Gerry, I'd share a second example. I'm curious what you think about this, because one of the examples I put in the book is a company called LifePod. So this is a Boston-based company, Joe, and what they provide is a proactive AI-based conversational platform. So if you're a senior person living at home, LifePod, think of it like an Alexa in some ways, that actually proactively connects with senior citizens. And what's powerful about that from a ritual standpoint is it connects those three things: emotions. And so, for example, LifePod will say to a senior citizen, "Hey, Julia, it's a great time to get up and stretch." Now, of course, it's programmed by its caregiver, but I'll tell you, the LifePod participants rated the thing like 100% with satisfaction. And here's what's interesting to me. This is a computer, Joe. Is they said, "I don't feel alone anymore." So to me, this is one of the reasons why I think we really need to wrestle with this idea of AI and technology and its role here, because to me, digital first companies are understanding that AI can produce emotional outcomes than which we hadn't thought was possible before in new ways. That to me is kind of quite compelling, to speak to Gerry, your point about how do you scale this thing in a consistent way, because a bot never gets frustrated. It never gets tired. It complains about overtime, right? It just performs based on a very domain-specific set of algorithms. And if it can be proactive with human intervention, then it becomes pretty powerful.
Yeah, I guess, in the geek space, we have stories about people falling in love with their Siri companion back in the days when it came out. And I still can relate to this idea of adding some kind of a humanness to something that is not really human, just personification, I guess. The same as you have a dog, why wouldn't you have an AI companion that is there to take care of you? And this is a great example of that goes against that entire thing about AI will come in and will steal our jobs. Because it's in this situation, in this setup, you actually don't have that. The AI comes and will bring you something new, will bring you companionship that normally wouldn't have that, and will also bring a proactive care. It will monitor your life signals, like you will have all kinds of wearables. It will take all of your measurements, and this data will feed into how that AI companion will interact with you, and what these are the things. These are the areas where it will create a totally new market in terms of business, and also it will shift a little bit our economies. Even just think of this entire healthcare space that will go from let's treat whatever pain you have into more of a let's keep you healthy, and not even not it's not just even about let's keep you healthy really, but it's also about how can we make your life better? How can we make you live with quality of life, which is really the goal in all of this. And I think this is a place where AI can give you that extra and can add to it. And I don't think it's going to replace anyone's job. It will augment the healthcare system. If you can put it together in a way that it creates a nice experience, that it comes together as a ritual, if you say, like habits, creating habits, that it will build into becoming something very useful, both from a point of view of simply medical assistance, but also in terms of psychology. People need companionship, and this can provide some sort of companionship, I guess.
And so those are the benefits, Joe, that you and Gerry have been breaking down. But what are some of the challenges to using AI to create rituals? Because I'm sure it's just not push button and, all right, cool, create a ritual for me, AI, ChatGPT, do that. I'm sure there's more to it. So talk about some of those challenges.
I did read a post, Joe, before this, that someone's embedded a way to run a podcast with ChatGPT. I don't know if you saw that. That was great. No, there are challenges. And I think one of the things I say in the book, Joe, is, when it comes to this, remember, the back end is the front end. So when this goes awry, it's because the data is sort of terrible that the algorithm is basing on. So I don't know if you saw the 60 Minutes with the great Leslie Stahl, the president of Microsoft, and then she was getting demonstrated by ChatGPT, and the computer engineer, the software engineer showing it to her said, well, as you see, it says you've been with NBC 20 years. And Leslie Stahl looked at her and said, well, no, I haven't. And she said, well, it kind of doesn't get that. And she goes, oh, it doesn't really care about that. And she said, well, CBS does, because that's where I was 20 years. And so here's the thing. Where it goes wrong is when the data it's pulling from is just spurious. It's just not accurate. So when you see it really well done is when it's very domain specific, as Gerry, as you were saying, in healthcare. For LifePod, it pretty much knows what the interactions will be between one of their patients or customers and kind of their needs, right? And the whole thing is configured by a caregiver. But what's cool about that is that my 86-year-old mother-in-law sure won't remember when her nephew's birthday is, but LifePod will, and can say, hey, Carol, would you like to call your nephew? Today's his birthday. So think about where this could go, Joe. I mean, with the next version of this third generation of AI, not only could you be reminded of a call, it could help her create a card. It could find a way to create a personal connection to grow her social network beyond a way that she ever would. The last thing I'll say about this is the power of AI. You had a guest on the other day on influencer marketing, and it was a great session you had with him, Joe, with Evan, I think, right? And, he made this point that people come to sites that have lifestyle data, not just product data. And think about the data that we can collect now with things like artificial intelligence that will just make the ability to personalize the experience much more robust. Because where personalization is heading, as you know, it's about relevance today. It's not about the next click or the next logical product. It's about really, do you give me something that's meaningful to me and that tells me you're paying attention in a way that's not creepy, but incredibly relevant?
Yeah, I think it's all about making sure that you pay attention to AI bias and the way AI learned what it needs to be performing, especially in very outlier cases. Especially in healthcare, it's symptomatic for everybody. Biology is not exactly the same for everybody. You will have very weird diseases also, and symptoms that are, if you're reading on the internet the symptoms, you will think that, oh, I have this one, I have that one, oh my God, I should see a doctor. But it's really not the case. It's not trivial, especially with the corner cases, how to deal with that and how to set it up so that it can realize that, hey, I haven't been trained for this. Let me escalate, let me bring in a doctor, let me deal with it in a very different way than for the rest of the population, which probably would not need this kind of attention, this kind of a very special treatment. But it's really paying attention to this, and it has to be supervised. has to be supervised and monitored. There have to be controls in place on everything that is being performed by AI. It cannot be just willy-nilly released into the wild and then let's hope things will go fine.
Well, let's talk about the data piece, Joe, that you mentioned. And you talk about the piece of 60 Minutes with Leslie Stahl and the AI incorrectly identifying where she worked. I wonder if, and I'd love to get your take on this, is because of the fact that now that more and more content is AI generated and it's incorrect, will the AI content being produced 5 years from now go and use the incorrect data that was processed by AI 5 years earlier? Like, is there some sort of vicious cycle here where it's just keeps feeding itself wrong information and there's no one there to stop it?
I wish I had the answer to that one, Joe. That's a crystal ball question. But but you're making a point that I think is really relevant for your listeners. And that is this. Don't confuse what you see in the general, like AI pulling from data in the general internet, universe of the internet, Reddit and things like that, with the power of enterprise-grade machine learning that is kind of taking whole points of operating margin out of the expense line for big companies. Like, for example, at Lemonade, their machine learning platforms run all the DevOps processes. It pushes 18 to 20 new releases every day without human intervention. I mean, that's in a big software enterprise, that's a lot of people doing it. They run that automatically. When their chatbot, they call her AI Maya, when she onboards a new customer to sell them an insurance policy, she asks them 14 questions, okay? In that 14 questions, to figure out what that price should be in your location, she hits 1,700 data points from their data sets. This is a proprietary data set. So the reason I make this point is there's two different worlds here. There is the world of, how you apply AI machine learning in a very specific way for a company delivering a great experience with all the back-end processes. And then there's kind of what you see in the open internet. Now, to answer your question is, I think I read yesterday, Gerry, you may have read it too, that 5 large or 9 large AI companies have come together to start to put together a set of standards and things that they're going to do. So, Joe, I suspect we'll see other processes that will validate, kind of create and make data that's much more verified before it produces the outcome. But listen, you do have to be careful. I mean, I would not submit a college entrance exam based on something I pulled from ChatGPT. I just wouldn't.
Yeah, definitely. If you put it together for the college entrance exam, you need to read it and you need to make sure that you agree with what ChatGPT wrote. And I think the amazing thing is how many times it gets it right. I mean, you are practically boiling down the entire internet. You are putting together the data for the entire history of human knowledge that is available on the internet, and you make it relevant, in a second or two. Like, yeah, sometimes it gets it wrong, but it's amazing how many times it gets it right. And to your point, Joe, this is, it's kind of a gimmick. It's, let me ask you something and you're going to give me an answer and whatever. But the real application are on these use cases that are very specialized, that are, you have a very dedicated database of curated knowledge, of best practices, of areas that really make sense and are supervised and are really cared for. When the AI learns from those things, it can be very powerful and very specific, very niche. And I think those are the areas that going to be transformed, and it's going to transform the way we work. I mean, our area, we work a lot on software and integration. It's amazing how useful it can be. If you use it properly, it can really enable you to be 50% more productive, which is not trivial. We are not talking about a 1 or 2 point productivity improvement. We are talking about 15, 20, 30% in terms of productivity improvement. And if you're not using it, you're gonna just be left behind. It's the same as you would not use a car without a steering wheel assist or a brake assist or any kind of the gadgets that you currently have today. That's exactly tomorrow. You won't be using we won't be doing any kind of work that is not assisted in a way or another by an AI assistant.
this brings up one thing that is not part of the AI conversation, and that's we are all seeing it from the media point of view of ChatGPT, Claude, a Bard. We're seeing all like the use cases of the everyday person, but we don't talk about the specificity of AI and how it helps individual businesses with that individual data points that they're applying. Joe, that's where you see the greatest impact of AI in terms of just being able to do a specialty work for a specialty company using specialized data.
Yeah, I mean, Joe, think about it for a second. The way a traditional insurance company would write a policy is if I'm an agent, I would meet with you and I'd ask you probably 10 or 15, 20 questions. And then if it's a really nice day, I might say, hey, Joe, I have tickets to the Jets game. If we leave now, we can actually, kind of beat the traffic on. Sure, let's go. And so what happens to that insurance form, right? This is my briefcase, and then eventually I bring it in. Whereas in 14 questions, as I said before, AI Maya generates 1,700 data points. Think about the difference in quality that makes, right? In terms of what she's learned and everything that platform has been able to do to create much more precision. And the second thing is this notion of once we start to be able to, like with Lemonade now, they're into this about 8 or 9 years in terms of claims data. So what does that mean? It means they suddenly have enough data across the United States to be able to understand the probability of your likelihood to claim based on your last experience. Number two, the probability of you to buy other Lemonade products as you grow with them, and the probability of you staying with them. So the 3 C's, customer retention here, cross-sell, and claims. That's powerful. Here's the thing. Lemonade now generates 86% of their marketing spend based on what they call LTV6, their lifetime value low kind of version 6 calculation. How many other companies do you know generate 80% of their marketing spend in a region based on that data? And that's one of the things we see in digital-first companies. They're looking at things like lifetime value much more as a predictive measure, something that's dynamic versus how we've looked at it for many years, which is kind of backward looking and built based on just rule of thumb and averages. So to me, this is a pretty powerful insight.
All right, so the conversation of bias came up earlier. Now let's talk about how this is going to inform businesses when it comes to creating these AI applications. How can these be created, these rituals that we've been talking about, that are ethical, transparent, and respectful of customer data and privacy? Joe, this is a big question. This is the one outside of the AI is going to destroy the world. It's the ethics of it is the second concern when it comes to the top 5 concerns of when it comes to AI.
So, humans tend to speak out of both sides of our mouth around privacy, right? So there's a study that was well acknowledged called in the UK, and they discovered this thing called the acceptability gap. And generally speaking, what it meant was you and I care about data privacy, but we sure like the value we get from personalization from it. Like, it's always like, I kind of don't want to share my data, but I sure would love to get the results of it if I had shared my data. The second thing they found that people that really care about privacy and their own data typically do take action on it. It's a pretty small percentage of the population, but there are folks that go in and they turn off, all the things that you would turn off around tracking and things like that. So from an ethical standpoint, where the future is going when you think of products or platforms like Web3, which is this semantic version of the internet, which is really decentralizing data and what they call trustless networks, there's a path that this could head where, you will own your data. You could be a broker for what your data is and decide what you want to be able to sell that for. And we're coming into a cookieless world, right? So I think there's positive things about this. Now, your bigger question is, how does AI take that? And then are there ethical dilemmas around that? I'm sure we will run into them as this thing starts to grow and flourish more. But honestly, I think the bigger question is the one that Gerry, you raised around the employee experience and how will employees be impacted by that? And I tend to agree with you. I mean, I'm sure there'll be roles that AI will actually, probably have an impact on from a relevant standpoint. But what I see in companies like at Amazon and things like that with just walkout technology, it actually improves the employee role. So rather than being a cashier for 8 hours, you tend to be a customer support person because the AI and the computer vision allows you to just walk out. So there's no need for a cashier. I see those jobs kind of like getting better, being more interesting than the other kind of version which we hear.
You focus more on the experience and not on just some kind of the checkout process, or which is very repetitive and mechanical and doesn't really add customer value. So, and it's also, I believe, that is not really that fun for the person that is performing the checkout. It's much more interesting to actually have a conversation with someone to discuss about preferences and guide you through the process and provide you extra value, assisted by an AI that can give me some advice while I'm talking to you. That's a much more interesting experience. Let me ask you this, Joe. How is AI transforming your industry, your angle of creating these experiences and putting it together? What's the buzz in your part of the digital experience world?
Yeah, great question. Well, two areas. One is, for example, with call center reps, AI is really being helpful because what AI allows in the call center is to make call center reps just way more productive. And so you have, if you think of performers as high, moderate, kind of low performers, what AI can do, we work with a company called Excel, and they're able to identify what are the behaviors that their high-performing call center reps demonstrate. And then in real time, they're able to look at those conversations and be able to help kind of, folks that maybe don't perform at the same level to get to that level. So it's almost like they're able to move to the mean and reduce the variation by applying artificial intelligence to look at those conversations customers have with the high performers and figure out what seems to work. That's powerful. You get better results, first time call resolution, better conversions, things like that. So moving the whole population. And what is interesting to me is companies that are doing this well, Gerry and Joe, they're really scaling how far they go. So Cemex Go is a great example. It's one of the best examples that I ran across in our research for digital transformation done right. And one of the things they made very clear was as they applied artificial intelligence and digital channels to different steps in the customer journey, first, they really tested and learned to make sure it worked. And then, they just watched adoption. They didn't actually just pull the trigger. They saw how people were adopting into digital channels, and then they would back off on the manual. But when they saw it was challenging, they made sure they didn't leave the customer in the lurch, trying to figure this thing out. So there's lessons to be learned about that. Last thing I'll say about this too is for companies that really want to understand how artificial intelligence will work in their business, it's helpful to actually hire people with machine learning backgrounds. These are no longer people in that back room that no one really knows what the heck they're doing, right? It's like, take a look at your employee roles. Are you bringing people on board with a data science background? Bringing them into the organization in a way that they understand the business versus just IT, if that makes sense.
It's like social media all over again, Joe. You remember back when Facebook and Twitter popped? They just looked to who's the kid in the office who had a Facebook account. Okay, you're a director of social media. It's deja vu all over again, right, Joe?
It's true. It's very true.
And I want to wrap this up by talking about your book, and a big part of it is talking about design strategies. And I just read this old quote from Seth Godin, and I'm not sure if you guys read it, but he basically said, if Nike and decided to start a hotel, you would know what the hotel was about. But if Hyatt wanted to design a shoe, you'd be like, what because we don't know anything about Hyatt besides their hotels. But talk to me about the impact of building that brand that no matter how large it is, your brain sort of just populates, okay, this is what this means. How does a company using technology, using AI, able to develop a brand that's so strong, and obviously won't be as strong as Nike, but once you see like, okay, I know what they do.
Yeah, well, Nike is my example for designing immersive experiences, as you know, Joe. And it's because, I just sent a note to one of their executives about this, because it's very hard to find a better example of a company whose mission translate into the experiences they deliver both employees and customers. I mean, it just is like such a precise conversion from what they stand for as a company to what they deliver in terms of the experience. Especially kind of what they've committed to in terms of their net zero commitments. All the companies in my research, Joe, honestly exceed their ESG targets for 2023. This is Nike's 50-year anniversary as a company, as you know, and their sustainability report, I think, is essential reading for anyone in business today in terms of, how they've kind of, everything from how they reuse materials into new shoe products and things like that, how they build their house of innovation out of recycled building materials, but mostly how they celebrate the athlete. They're there to serve the athlete, and they define an athlete, Joe, as someone who has a body. Okay, so that's a pretty big market segment if you think about it. But yeah, I mean, the thing that's powerful about it is everything about the experience that they design with this, Nike app. You could take use their app and look at your feet and get a perfect fit for your foot. That's better than the old fashioned you would get in a shoe store. And then everything you see in the store is kind of filtered by your shoe size. You can walk up to a mannequin, the House of Innovation in New York, and with a code, scan the QR code, and you can pick the products off that mannequin that you want to see sent to the waiting room and being queued and alerted when the changing room is ready for you. And then, by the way, when you're in the changing room, you can change the mood from a yoga studio to because they found that people like to take selfies of themselves trying on Nike clothes. They're paying attention to the customer. So what are they doing? They're doing more than selling you products. Like, they're bringing you into an experience that's wildly immersive that just speaks to celebrating you as the athlete that you are. To me, that's remarkable. I mean, to your point, if they built a hotel, you would know it, even if you didn't see the swoosh on the outside.
Yeah. And Gerry, this is your sort of like the blood running through your veins, this sort of customer experience, Gerry. So weigh in on that.
We all get lost in what are we doing? We are building shoes. And I think it's much more important also how are we doing it, and how do we wrap this entire experience, put it together, wrap it up? How do we interact with our customers, and how do we create that emotional experience with them? And customers, especially the ones that are really an ambassador to your brand, they will tell you how they interact with your brand. They will tell you what is important. They will tell you what they like, what they don't like. And if you're paying attention, one step at a time, you're building this emotional wrapper of the brand, and you can associate with okay, this is that swoosh is that, and then it automatically creates in your head that kind of a mind map of what that is. Meanwhile, if you're not doing that, well, everybody associates you with okay, I just do hotels, and that's it.
Well, Joe, it's a bit like you had a great podcast with Arun Kumar. Remember, he said, "Clarity is my drug." I listened to that podcast a couple times because it's just so rich with insights, and it's the same idea. It's being able to go from the brand promise to an experience that expresses that powerfully and does what Charlotte Beer suggests, create emotional involvement with customers.
And so, Joe, before we go, tell us about your new book, The Digital First Customer Experience.
So basically, what I explore here are three things. One is, what is driving these changes? So I look at kind of the impact of what we all experienced with COVID and social injustice and things like that. So there's a culture piece that's driving this. The second one is this notion of convergence of technologies. So for example, it's not known to everybody how much faster 6G will be over 5G. The answer is 30 to 50 times. I mean, think about that. So what will happen in the next 5, 6, 7 years around the convergence from artificial intelligence to edge-based computing is a big deal about how you think about that. And then the third, of course, is competition. And what's different for digital-first companies is to not just think about your value proposition, but also the value network, linking digital assets in a way that makes it very hard to copy. Then the second piece is I go into detail around these 7 design strategies, and I use a single example on each one to go really into the heart of the matter. We talked about Nike. So we go deep into how they design immersive experiences, how that actually came to life, and then really what's at the core of why they're able to do that so well. And then, Joe, the final piece of the playbook, 4 steps from, start off by solving the right problems to how do you execute to scale so you can take these ideas and execute it in your own company.
And I love to rile Gerry up at the end of every episode, Joe, so humor me as well. There is this argument that every company, no matter what you make, you are a tech company. Gerry believes in every fiber of being that is the wrong message to send out to anybody. So when you hear someone spout that, no matter what kind of company you are, you're a tech company, what's your initial thought to that?
Well, Joe, I grew up in a banquet hall. Until I was 11, I thought my name was coffee or tea. So I totally appreciate that. At the same time, I was coming back from, we have a little cottage outside of town, and I pulled into this little coffee shop these students had set up with a little, it said it was air conditioning. There must have been baking hot in there. And they had, they were making, frozen coffee and things like that. And luckily they had Square, so I could pay for it because I had no cash, because who has cash? So to some degree, I do agree every company is a tech company. At the same time, there's nothing like, getting a perfectly made frozen beverage, frozen coffee, full of brownies, by the way, from this high school student who's getting ready for college, and the personal connection that was so much fun.
Yeah, but we should never forget that if you're into coffee making business, make sure that you do that coffee well, even if you have a lot of technology to help you do it well. And that what Joe was saying. This is like what I'm saying generally is that you should not forget what is your main line of business. If you're into selling shoes, make sure that you sell shoes properly and you use technology to properly sell shoes and create a customer experience and enable a great emotional connection, but you're still selling shoes. You have to do that really well. And you can be a tech-enabled shoe seller or a tech-enabled coffee making chain, but you're not really a tech company. You're not building the technology that enables that thing to happen. You're not building the AI, but you can use the AI in a really smart way to empower that experience and augment that experience.
But Gerry, and I'm thinking you'd agree with this, what we have borrowed from software, I sold a software business a couple of years ago. What software has brought to the business world is agile thinking and rapid experimentation. That agile methodology, which really came out of the software development industry, has really gone past it in terms of how we think about product development, things like that. And to that extent, that's been incredibly powerful in terms of making coffee products and shoe products that meet expectations every time.
Awesome. His name is Joe Wheeler. He's the author of The Digital First Customer Experience. Joe, it's been a great chat. Thank you for humoring me. I like to rile Gerry up at the end there, so thanks, sir, for piping in there. Really appreciate the time, Joe.
Thanks, Joe. Pleasure to be here, Gerry. Nice to spend time with both of you.
Thank you.
This has been The Great Digital Transformation with Gerard Zatvani. To participate in the conversation, go to gerardzatvani.com. The Great Digital Transformation is a production of Forbes Books.